After years of the first-person shooter genre being dominant through the PC world and GoldenEye 007 leaving much to be desired in terms of putting something like Doom onto what's possibly the worst controller for it, Bungie needed a game to save their company from bankruptcy after the disaster of Myth 2. For those who don't know, Myth 2 had a bug where if you try to uninstall it from your computer, then it would follow orders, but since Bungie is full of overachievers, it would also delete every other file on your computer's hard drive. In turn, Bungie had to recall all their distributed copies and print new ones, costing them roughly around $1 million. So, Bungie, nearing bankruptcy, needed a saving grace, and conveniently Microsoft was looking for a launch title for their first hurrah into the video game console business with the Xbox. So Microsoft pitched them a deal. Bungie had this one game they were working on called Monkey Nuts that had absolutely no direction whatsoever. So Microsoft said to make this into a sellable product in 1 year so it can be a launch title for the Xbox. So 1 year passes and Monkey Nuts turned into Halo Combat Evolved. What was once an open world RTS clusterfuck is now a first person shooter with 10 missions. Halo is often described as a combat sandbox where you have a wide variety of weapons and are told to use them as you wish. Every single weapon is viable and you're open for experimentation. That being said, Halo CE fails in that regard. Most weapons feel like pea shooters and some are obviously better than others. It's not that you can't use every single weapon, in fact you can, but I can confirm you will have a much harder and arguably less fun time beating the game with just the needle or an assault rifle than you would with the Magnum and plasma pistol. Most of the game you'll be sticking to the plasma pistol and Magnum, only switching them out with the shotgun and maybe the assault rifle when the flood shows up. To prove my point, I did what all self-proclaimed reviewers do and I made a tier list of every weapon in the game in terms of usefulness for the campaign. At the bottom tier is the Needler. This is an incredibly situational and is only really used if there's nothing else available to defend yourself with. In fact, the only time I used this in my playthrough for this video was in 2 Betrayals when I had no other weapons to really use and I was really low on health, so I used it to cheaply kill the enemies on the levels below me. Also in D tier is the Plasma Cannon. It's a really good weapon, but you will almost never find it, so while it's a very good especially for crowd controls, it's so rare that I can't in the right mind put it above D tier. In CE it's the Plasma Rifle. Every single Covenant weapon in Halo CE is projectile based, unlike the UNSC weapons which are hit scan. The trade-off is that they're way better for dealing with enemies, specifically elites. But the only reason it's at a lower tier is because the plasma pistol does everything the plasma rifle does but better, but I'll get to the plasma pistol later. The assault rifle is the only one that gets a B tier appearance here, and even then I debated putting it lower in the list. But I put it here because I found it to be semi-useful against the Covenant and pretty useful against Popcorn Flood. The Popcorn Flood is really the only time I see this useful and being reasonable to have it on you at all times, but even then there's other weapons that can handle the Popcorn Flood. In A tier, there's the Sniper and Rocket Launcher. The Sniper is great and it can be very good for taking care of Covenant from afar and up close. It's good in the mission Halo to pick off Covenant or Marines if you oh so please. In Truth and Reconciliation, it's good for clearing out waves of falling enemies. There is so much practicality to this. The only reason that it's an A tier, although I promptly pick it up every time I see, is that it's only present maybe 6 times in the game, so it can't be used too often. And because of that, I find myself using this weapon very sparingly because there's no way of knowing when I'd really want to use it, so it's better to save it. Then it takes up one of my 2 inventory slots available just because I'm worried I'll need it for something much more important, but at the end of the day I'm just holding on to a dead weight. The rocket launcher also suffers from the same curse, but it's a tad bit less extreme. It only appears in the 4th mission, Silent Cartographer, but it's very useful. Without a doubt, the most useful mission it appears on is 2 Betrayals. By this point, the Flood shows up a lot and the game drops a whole lot of rocket launchers. Normally, the rocket launcher isn't my weapon of choice for the Flood, but it tends to get the job done, especially since the Flood is in small clusters around here. Realistically, there are better weapons for what the rocket launcher is useful for. The Frag Grenade is great for the same purpose. Taking out hunters is a lot better with the Magnum or Sniper. Simply using it as a casual weapon is just a mistake, but the rocket launcher is really good for taking care of all of those uses. That being said, I don't recommend having this in your loadout unless you genuinely need it. The only time I used it that wasn't case sensitive was in 2 Betrayals, and that's only because I didn't have any other weapons to use. It's great and it deserves to be an A tier, but if anything it's the mediocre one of the bunch. Likely because frag grenades are literally fucking everywhere. It's not the best for anything it does, and I wouldn't use it as a comparison for any other weapon. I'm not gonna say, but compared to the rocket launcher, for any weapon in the tier list, unless I'm saying how anything else can do it better. Well, we've reached S tier, and I have something to say about this tier, but first, the tier itself. The shotgun is of course just great. It becomes a necessity for your loadout for the second half of the game because the zombie flood is just a bit of a pain in the ass without it. The shotgun destroys elite shields damn near instantly, kills the hunters in like one shot, but again, its best use is for the flood. The Magnum is just the best weapon in the game. Any headshot will effectively be a 1 or 2 hit kill. Personally, I suck at it, but with practice you can destroy enemies in seconds with this gun. And finally, the plasma pistol. It's a very good weapon to say the least. You can shred an elite really fast, making them no issues. Stealth elites are no problem with them. A plasma pistol fully charged can destroy an elite and jackal shields immediately, so you can go up to them and smack them in the face. Now that I've gone through the entire tier list, I'm gonna go against what this entire segment of the video by saying that this tier list should not exist. I should not have to make this tier list. Again, Halo is described as a combat sandbox, implying that you can play however you'd like to. However, I find myself and many others using the same set of maybe 5 weapons total because those are simply the most effective for getting through the game. In other words, it's the Doom shotgun. This is a big problem with Combat Evolved's weapon system. It appears to have a wide variety of weapons that you can use for all different purposes, but in execution, it really only has the small amount. So let's put this into perspective where the 6 useful weapons are the only weapons in the game. How is the gameplay? Well, it's amazing. Even with the realistically limited arsenal, the variety of ways to get through encounters is incredible. I don't think there's a single combat encounter in this game that I've had that played out the same as any single one before it. In fact, for the playthrough in this video in Truth and Reconciliation, I didn't grab the camo to play it safe for this encounter. I just straight up killed everything very easily because the situation played out that way. In other times, the situation would play out in a way where I end up struggling even though I'd argue my skill level in Halo CE hasn't really changed. If anything, I got worse at the game. The game in a way changes the way that the AI behaves, so every playthrough feels different from the last one, and I'm here for it. If there's one thing you're gonna recognize Halo for, it's shit. The vehicles in Halo are just flat out one of the best parts of Halo, and Combat Evolved is no exception. I'll admit that CE has a very low set of vehicles, but they're still pretty fun for the most part. The Warthog is obviously the best one, but nobody was expecting anything to be better than this, especially in Halo CE. Even though the Marines are straight up just brain dead individuals, just driving in this game is always fun. The tank sucks, fuck the tank. The Banshee is just a flying vehicle, it shoots and stuff. Flying, unless it's janky, is always fun in video games, so Halo obviously does it well. The only problem with it is just the fact that there isn't really much time with it. It shows up in Assault on the Control Room, 2 Betrayals, and if you really want to count it, Keys. But in Keys, it shows up at the very end of the level, and it's just used as a level transition, and the Banshee breaks the game so you can go through walls. It's hilarious, but it's not exactly a feature for the level. So with a total of 2 missions, the Banshee has very little reason to exist. Also, I can't help but think that the levels weren't exactly made for the Banshee at some points. Like this weird tower part in 2 Betrayals does not feel very good to use. Something about flying up, cycling around, and shooting and flying is just not very fun to do in any game, and Halo is no exception. I found myself kamikazing myself into the enemies at the top and then calling it a day. I want to like the ghosts in this game so badly. It has a lot to love. You can drive and shoot at the same time, which is one of the downsides to the Warthog, but it just feels so weird to drive, plus it barely has an appearance in the game. I just wish this was the best vehicle in the game, even if it had a small amount of game time. It's just how it feels so slippery is the only reason that it's not that great. Overall, Halo CE's vehicle list is disappointing to say the least. To be fair, hating the tank is just a me thing, but I hate it so much that I skip it every time I play it, and there's no way I'm making an exception for this video. Halo CE's pacing is actually quite unique for 2001 standards, and even now it still holds up. Effectively, every single area that you go into is a mini arena full of enemies. The game is either full of hallways or mini arenas, and it's one after another. The pace is really just how excessive the enemies are in the level. For example, in Truth and Reconciliation, before the Covenant ship half of the level, it's just wave after wave of combat coming from the ship needing to get taken care of. It's a very effective way to keep the player engaged. Halo is at its best when the combat scenarios are designed like this. That's why a mission like TNR is so good. It takes something as simple as hallways and turns them into small little arenas that can be cleared in like 30 seconds. Teaching a player how to play your game is something that many games struggle with pulling off. Some games try the tell the player how to do it, which is probably the least effective way to teach a player anything. Games are an interactive medium, and just taking the interactivity out of it won't do much help. The most common way of teaching a player something is with the showing the player how the game works. It's a very good way of doing things. Show me that the blue lasers in Half-Life blow me up instead of some science guy telling me that the blue lasers blow me up. Halo does neither of those. The closest Halo gets to a show don't tell is with the opening area of the Pillar of Autumn when you're given no weapon as you watch the Covenant shoot your ally, showing that the Covenant is a bunch of bad guys. So how does Halo teach the player the mechanics of the game? The way Halo teaches the player how to play their game is with learn by doing. Essentially, the game puts the player in a scenario that requires a certain mechanic in order to make it easier. I say makes it easier because the game doesn't make you do anything. The best example of this is the grenade tutorial at the end of the Pillar of Autumn. Essentially, there's a huge group of Covenant and the game puts the player in a spot where they have a bunch of grenades in front of them, some cover, then lets the player figure it out for themselves. You can actually get through this game without grenades if you just don't figure it out. Being a tactical learner myself, I found Halo when I first played it many years back to be very easy to understand the mechanical side of things. I talked about the Halo formula a bit a few minutes ago, and for the most part the game is very consistent with that type of pacing and level design. There are 10 missions in Halo CE and 7 of them follow that design philosophy. But there are 3 exceptions to that idea, and I want to highlight them and explain how they differ and whether or not they do it well. The Silent Cartographer puts the player onto an island pretty much inhabited by Covenant. Every area feels pretty connected with each other, so it feels less like the whole island is just little segments of arenas, but instead feels like one big arena, even though it's basically just a bunch of segments of mini arenas. While most of the missions in the game are get from point A to point B, Silent Cartographer has more of an objective-like mission here. Open the locked door in the main building, go into the building, find the map to the Silent Cartographer, then finally exiting the mission through Thorhammer, the best form of transportation in the galaxy. The Silent Cartographer is my favorite mission in Halo Combat Evolved, so I'm going to ruin the mood of this video now and talk about the universally agreed to be the worst mission in the game. The library is just a flat out awful level. I think what Bungie tried to do here was make a more run and gun like level, but on higher difficulties such as heroic or legendary, playing the level as a run and gun will only really result in an untimely demise. The entire level is just the same hallway after hallway, and the pacing is frequently stopped with 343 Guilty Spark needing to unlock a door. In other games, halting progress to have a character unlock a door or something like that normally wouldn't be a problem, but the thing is with Halo is that the levels are designed so that you can play them at your own pace. While something like the mission Halo requires the player to kill all the enemies and can't really progress without killing them, there are ways to get past them without it. Kill all the Marines in the areas, or just kill the enemies in a faster way. But with the library, there's no unique ways to fight the Flood here. The only viable weapons to deal with the Flood effectively are the shotgun and assault rifle, and the game doesn't give the player a turret or anything to help out with crowd control. I feel like most players don't have much of a problem with the library at first during their first playthrough, but then they hear 343 Guilty Spark say that the first door is the first of 10 and they just have the worst feeling of dread in their life. Also, Rocket Flood. Fuck Rocket Flood. When a game throws a one-hit kill enemy into the game and gives no real chance of recovery without knowing exactly what's going to happen next, it's bad design. In fact, it's straight up just artificial difficulty. The library is an example of a game changing its formula for a bit and failing, but I say we explore the third level that changes the formula and end this segment with some good. 343 Guilty Spark opens with a dark swampy area, with Covenant running away for some unknown reason. Go through some simple Covenant encounters, walk up into some big building that's supposedly where Captain Keyes is being held. Entering this building, there's nothing here. No Marines, some Covenant only in the beginning area, all huddled up mostly. There are some combat arenas, but most of this is just empty. It gives off an unsettling feeling to the player because pretty much everywhere else up to now is full of Covenant. Going into one of the rooms, there's a Marine that starts yelling and shooting at you, screaming about how he's not going to let himself become one of them. The only option I see is shooting his brains out. Survival of the fittest, I suppose. Then going through the level and entering this room, there's a cutscene that plays where Chief opens a door and a dead Marine falls through the door. Chief puts in a recording from one of the Marines' dead bodies, and it shows a recording of Keyes, Johnson, the best one, and a few other Marines just talking about how they need to find the weapons. But then a weird noise is heard. Then suddenly the entire team is attacked by the Flood. Then the video goes to static. Leaving the cutscene, something starts thumping the door, and then the flood breaks through the door and starts attacking you. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is how a damn good horror sequence is made. I've played through this game countless times. When I first played through this game as a kid, I was terrified. I wish I could relive that moment of encountering the flood for the first time again and again and again. 343 Guilty Spark is a very good level. A huge critique that Halo CE gets is the reuse of levels for the game. Out of the 10 missions in Halo CE, 3 are used from levels prior. The biggest offender of this is Assault on the Control Room and Two Betrayals, without a doubt, where Two Betrayals is quite literally going through the same level as Assault on the Control Room, but backwards. Keys and the Maw are the other 2 levels that fall under this category, but those aren't as bad because they're modified a little bit from the original to provide a unique experience. In fact, the Maw is my second favorite mission in the game, but regardless, it's actually an issue that a good 30% of the game isn't new. But again, the only mission where this is a problem is Two Betrayals. That's why whenever I play through this game, I do a skip on Assault on the Control Room with a Banshee grab, so I really only have to play the mission once. Even then, I still don't really like it. It's just way too long, but that's beside the point. I want to highlight the Maw because it's essentially the Pillar of Autumn but decaying, but the main reason it's my second favorite mission is because of the Warthog run at the very end. There are some reviews on YouTube where they call the driving in Combat Evolved janky and not fun and it ruins the Warthog run and all that jazz, but they're just wrong. The music to this segment is amazing, and the fact that everything just blowing up just adds to how cool all of this is. The timer in the corner really doesn't matter because there's no way you could run out of time with this, but it just feels so cool with the idea that everything's gonna blow up when you leave. The Maw is a great level, and it's just straight up the perfect finale to Halo Combat Evolved. I think it's important to mention that I played this game through Halo the Master Chief Collection, which is the definitive version of Combat Evolved and the definitive version of all the other games in the collection. You get Combat Evolved 2, 3, ODST, so if you want to experience Halo, whether to revisit a childhood game or to play it for the first time, it's definitely the best way to go. That being said, it's important to mention that this version of Combat Evolved is the anniversary version of the game. Luckily, classic graphics exist because the anniversary graphics are actually just awful and flat out do things wrong, but the collection defaults to the anniversary graphics, so if you want to experience this in the better way, then I recommend either going to the settings in the mission select or just pressing tab on your keyboard or select on your controller in-game. One other thing to note about the anniversary version is that it uses the Gearbox PC port as what the version is based off of. Basically what the Gearbox PC port is Bungie wanted to get a PC port of Combat Evolved, so they got Gearbox Software, who at the time was just an assistant developer and made things like the Half-Life expansions and didn't really have their own IPs or name in the industry, and Gearbox ported Combat Evolved to PC. It's a good port. The AI is a little bit different, which is how I was able to do this Banshee grab and AOTCR, but yeah, MCC is a really good way to play this game and is arguably the best deal for video games ever, but that's for an entirely different video. Halo Combat Evolved is a special game. It's really hard to just make a video talking about it to give the game justice, and the only real way to show what makes this game special is just to tell you to play it yourself. It's $10 on Steam, and when it goes on sale, the whole MCC is dirt cheap. But regardless, Halo is amazing, and it's the perfect start to a very, very special series.